Welcome back to Money Media. James here, and today I'm going to give you some information about tariffs because I know it's on everyone's lips and the world currently is talking about it. So I want to give you the information about what tariffs actually are and why they're really important in a global trading environment. So to kick things off, what is a tariff? Now, a tariff can be seen as essentially a tax but on other countries. So with tax, a government can tax the citizens of their own country, right? And we understand that. But a government cannot tax another government. They don't have that power. So what they do instead, in another form of taxation, is they levy what's called a tariff on their exports or the imports coming into the nation. So if China is exporting goods into America, then America can impose a tariff, which a tax, which is another word for a tax, can impose a tariff on those goods coming in. And what a tariff is essentially they will charge those companies sending goods into America. They will charge them X percentage on those goods. And what that does is it makes those goods more expensive to the people within that country buying those goods. Now, this is very important. Now, why is it important? Well, to understand why it's so important, I want to pedal back and explain why taxation is actually really important. Now, it is commonly understood that taxation is important so that the government can collect money so they can then redistribute it throughout the economy and pay for different things like roads, like infrastructure, like schools, etc. Taxation actually has another really, really important function, and that is control. So what taxation does, when used effectively, it can control what people do and what people don't do. And I'm going to give you a really simple example of this. And for those of you in Australia, I'm being completely facetious. So let's say your country had a housing crisis. And a housing crisis being the demand is greater than the supply. So there's more people that want a house than there is houses available, right? What a government could do if they actually wanted to aid or help out or reduce this housing crisis would be, one of the solutions could be to reduce the taxation on inputs of building houses. Now, what that would do would mean it would be easier, more affordable to build houses, and therefore more houses would be able to be built, right? So that's a form of taxation that controls what happens in the market. Now, what a tariff does is it controls what goods flow in and out of a country and from which countries they flow in and out of. So again, using the same example I used earlier between China and the United States. Let's say the United States manufactures steel within the country, but it can only sell it and make a profit when it's selling steel at $100 a kilogram. However, over in China, because of certain costs are cheaper over there, then they can actually make the same kilogram of steel for $50. And so once they export it to America, you've got steel that costs $50 versus local steel that costs $100. And so just from a cost perspective, it's quite easy to see that we would purchase the $50 steel, right? And that would hurt the local manufacturing, meaning that they wouldn't be able to sell enough steel to make enough money. And so if you were to impose a tariff on steel coming out of China, you're essentially controlling the flow. So if you were to impose a 100% tariff on Chinese steel, the steel cost would go from $50 to $100. So in this example, Americans would have an option to purchase steel from China for $100 or steel from America for $100. And so rationally, you would think that most Americans would purchase the American steel at $100. That is how tariffs are used to control the market. But what that also does, as you may have guessed, is that instead of Americans being able to purchase steel for $50, they now have to pay double and purchase it for $100. So what that does also is reduces the purchasing power or the amount of steel that Americans can purchase. So what that actually does as well, it's anti-inflationary, which means because it reduces naturally the demand, then you will start to see production of steel, in this example, decrease. And what that does is takes the sting out of inflation, reduces inflation, which is what America needs to do right now because they're in a inflation rate of about 2.8%. And given their target rate is 2%, although they're not that far above it, they are above it. And so that will naturally bring down inflation. In a nutshell, that's tariffs, how they work, and why they're important for the global trade. For any more updates for Money Media, subscribe to our channel, and that way YouTube will give you a bit of a notification once we upload new videos, which can be really time sensitive. So it's important that you hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.